So, joining me today is someone who is an author, and we could say he's also a comedian. And if I'm not mistaken, he's a content creator as well. Please, guys, welcome Matthew Garnier. What's up, Matthew? How's it going?
Hey man, I'm doing all right.
I
Been
hope,
busy few days, but I'm just always ready to talk about that real stuff and throw in some comedy, like you said.
yeah,
So
you have a
let's
nice
begin, man.
page.
This is what I live for.
I've been looking at your Instagram and YouTube and going through your like social media, trying to see what kind of things you present and what you put forward on the table for the audience. It was a bit difficult, I'm gonna say. It's not as because usually with content creators, their pages are consistent with one thing. Yours is it just
The opposite.
yeah, it's the
Yes.
opposite. It's the opposite, but in a good way. Because then
Really?
there's more to talk about. There's more. It just seems like you're a casual guy who's just presenting fun stuff for people, maybe with lessons as well. So I know that you've recently published a book, which I will be adding the link to the podcast's description. So please, guys, check it out. The book is called Swept Up Lessons from the End Times. Tell me more about it. It seems pretty interesting. Um,
Yeah, man. So as I was bouncing back and forth between comedy and absurd things and serious things, I decided I'd like to really try to do something that I could proudly present to the world at large that had a mix of all of those elements in it, and that would tell a story and present some ideas that I do take quite seriously. Um, and I really have always enjoyed writing, so I just thought let me take on that medium in in long form style. Um, my my experience as a kid growing up in church was a lot like many other American kids. Nothing crazy unusual from my perspective. Maybe there are people who've never heard of some of these traditions and ways of doing things that would find it kind of odd. But to me, it's a very common sort of upbringing that I had, except for that I was homeschooled. I didn't go to like a normal public school. But all that to say, I had sort of an unusual view of the world, both from that and just the way that I was wired. Like I always saw everything a little bit differently, I think, from how others viewed it. And so to me, the whole concept of religion was very it was something I became obsessed with. And most kids, they just kind of show up to church and it's like, yeah, I'm here and then I'll leave and then I'll hang out with my friends. And like there was that too, but um, I was I I had an obsessive personality, and so those were thoughts that consumed me from a very early age and kind of directed the way that I lived my life all the way through my 20s. And it's still, a big part of who I am just because it was so formative. But from always viewing the world through that perspective, I came to realize like that there's an element of religious thinking in kind of everyone's view of the world, whether they're religious or not. There's um, there's certain things that everybody takes just at face value, and they don't necessarily apply um, a direct experience or a lot of critical thinking to it. And at the end of the day, my conclusion isn't that everyone has to have, follow a scientific method for every thought that they have, but that there needs to be kind of um, a balance between the two where you can admit what things you really don't know and what things you're just sort of guessing at and making the best choice you can, and the things that you are like, man, this is the rock that I stand on because I know this thing, I have this experience that I can point to. um, and so just by telling my story the way I did and turning that into a memoir, I tie that in with how it affected me psychologically, and I think that it has a similar effect on a lot of people. And that's something I would, I really cared about advocating for people who are like have, experiencing that from an early age and going through anxiety and depression and whatever else as a result, and trying to figure out what's like the right way to have a spiritual identity and and both have some like reverence for the idea of God and of the supernatural and the mystery without maybe turning it into a cult or whatever it might be in anybody's situation. So yeah, that's a long answer for you, but I can get into the details as well.
Now, tell me more about your upbringing. So why were you homeschooled in the first place? Because I know a couple of people at uni that were homeschooled, and I never really asked them why. I just asked them what their experience was like, and they told me it wasn't like when they come to uni, it's a bit different because there's the element of socializing. You're being around people all the time. You're in a classroom setting instead of being at home. You don't have that element of relaxation of being in a comfortable space, let's say, or in a bubble. You're now moving on to the real world where there's human interaction. Some people might like you, others might dislike you, etc. So what, like, did you just study? Okay, no, let's not go on a tangent. Like the question is,
I get what you're getting at.
yeah, what was your experience like?
Yeah, so I think that the reasons that I was homeschooled is probably similar to why a lot of those people of sort of the same generation were homeschooled. Is that my parents and all my friends' parents had kind of this idea that like it would be better to keep their kids out of like secular, the mainstream culture to some extent, because from the religious side of things, being kind of fundamentalist Christian, that like social norms were often antithetical to their values, and many of those values I still have. I'm not a complete rebel, but and I get like, yeah, kids pick things up in public school that are often totally unhealthy and not necessarily true. And I think in any setting you have to expect that that's not, that you're going to hear and see things that you shouldn't just accept. But I think that was the main reason, and just to really, for my parents to be able to have more control over how we were raised. Some parents like to just send their kids off and be like, I'm done with you for the day, and then others just really want to be more directly involved. So I don't blame them for that. But I think there's a few different types of homeschoolers. So when I was growing up, that was the main reason that anyone was homeschooled, was kind of like, we don't accept the culture. We don't want to take part in that. We want to be different. And that's where you get a lot of the stuff like, for anybody who's seen that new documentary series about the Duggar family from 19 Kids and Counting, that sort of lifestyle is very familiar to me, where there's a religious component that sort of drives the way that they live their entire life. And for me, it wasn't quite as bad as what's depicted there, but I was around a lot of people like that. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but I'm sure somebody listening knows what I'm talking about. A lot of just very unusual ways of dressing, and just you could tell just by looking at these people that they are in some kind of bubble, and it's usually the homeschool bubble. Nowadays, I think homeschooling is trending more commonly just for like personal reasons of, whether it's safety or we think there's a better way to be educated, something more holistic. That not everybody is some kind of freak show for going into homeschooling. And I did get a pretty good education through it. Some kids definitely do not. It's more like stay at home but hands off at the same time. Mine was very structured. But that element you describe of not being well adjusted socially, that did apply to me too. I had a very hard time, when I was like in mainstream culture that wasn't a Christian environment, because that was sort of the bubble that I was in. And I held myself to those standards. I knew it didn't feel cool, and I wanted to break out a little bit, but it took quite a while to figure out like how to integrate with the mainstream.
Yeah, so it seems like you're at the office right now. Is that correct?
I'm getting ready to go into my second job, so I just got dressed for it, so as soon as we're done, I could bounce. But yeah,
No.
I'm just in my house.
We've got
Got a record player over here, kitchen over there. Yeah.
we've got two jobs.
Unfortunately, I do right now because so I've got one job that purely runs on commission. I'm a mortgage loan officer in North Carolina. So if anyone wants to buy a house, hit me up. And then, but unfortunately, in that position, you can make a lot of money. But if you have a month where
Mm.
you don't close any loans, you did not make any money that month. So last month, I didn't close any loans. I had some lined up, and they bailed last minute, so all my work was for free. And now I'm like, well, shoot, I got to pay the bills. So I picked up a job at a hotel. And this is, if you can't tell, I'm very exhausted right now. But that's that's what that's the risk you take working
Yeah,
in a volatile industry.
it is. So how do you find the time to write?
Because I only had one job at that point, so I was able to add on a second job of writing full time. I did give up social life completely. I'll be honest. That was because I probably was averaging 4 hours a day of writing. After I got home
Wow.
from work for about a year, and it was brutal. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, but I think that the desire to get out of the corporate world and not have to like live by the clock or be getting work calls at all hours was a driving force. I was like, I have to do something that I can put my name on and say, please buy this, and have a chance to, like, even if obviously like self-publishing one book to Amazon isn't going to make me a millionaire, but to be like, I've got my work is out there, if and see where that leads. It has not yet led to anything, if I'm being completely honest. I just, the all I can do is to put my stuff out there, and at some point hope that I catch a lucky break. So that's probably why I went all across the board with my YouTube content, because I was
Mm.
constantly just dropping hooks since I was like 16 whenever I posted the first video. Like, please, somebody pick me up. But looking back, most of it's not not stuff that's going to make me an overnight success.
Well, it's especially with YouTube, social media, content creation, it's a bit tricky, isn't it? Like understanding the mindset, understanding what people like and don't like, understanding the way the algorithm works. It just takes a lot of time,
Yeah.
takes a lot of effort, needs dedication. So I'm guessing like if you're not fully dedicated to it, it's gonna be a bit more difficult to get noticed. However,
Yeah.
maybe, and there are a couple of people who I've done an interview with, one being Vinny Potestivo and two, Katie Brinkley, I think. They talked about how to get the most out of your online business with the least amount of hours spent on Instagram and other social media platforms. So I would highly recommend that either you or anyone listening to this podcast
Okay.
check it out. Um, but yeah, the second point was what was the main idea or what is the main message that you want to send through your book?
There's so many that are all tied together. So I think for every reader, they'll pick up something that they see as the main message, because from the feedback I've gotten so far, there's some people who view it as a message of, like, be yourself in spite of the environment that you're stuck in. To some people, it's just about persistence through mental health struggles. And some people just see it as, I'm like going off against religion, which I don't intend to. So I guess the through line that I intended to put in it, if anything, would be figure out how to be honest with yourself, because that's like, when I'm interacting with anyone, I almost don't even care what their views, what their religious, their political, whatever their views are. I care about how they express it,
Mm.
right? And I think that all of that has to stem from an honest inner monologue where you can actually, I mean, you have to sit and dwell on things for a while to get to that point, but once you're there, it flows out of you,
Yeah.
and it will both make you a happier person, and it will make you, more productive in your circles. So for me, it was something I had to do because I was so depressed and so anxious about my very existence, that I was like, the only way to live is to be honest about this. And I had to reach a decision point because I was so terrified of what God would think of me or do to me if I wasn't believing the right thing. And so it had to be like this sharp point of decision where I say, okay, there has to be a reality that I actually do believe in, and not that I'm just saying that I believe in. And so for me, intellectual honesty, self-honesty, was not an easy choice. You know, most people would just look at that and say, yeah, that's a good virtue. Be honest with yourself. And everything that I was receiving through my religious indoctrination was actually saying, be dishonest because you don't believe this, but say you do so that you'll be on God's good side. And again, I still think there is probably a right way to practice, faith or religion or something like that. But that wasn't it, and that's not usually. I think in most of the American church, it is a dishonest belief system. So yeah, self-honesty. If I'm going to reduce it to anything, as a way of living authentically, gaining a bit of mental health, and living a reasonably productive life.
So, why do you think you were depressed? Like, did you manage to get to the root cause?
I think that every time depression comes up, I really make an effort to find the root cause, because I don't think it's just this cloud that appears overhead, and you can't get away from it, like some people would say. I do think I was born with a natural inclination toward depression. And I wonder, how much those factors playing into my upbringing, played into that. If sort of having this subjective trauma, no abuse, there was nothing, like no horrible stories that I haven't told here, but just that drastic mindset might have exacerbated the depression, or the proclivity to it. But I think mostly what I would say is that's just natural. That's just part of my eccentricity, is that I've just never felt like my mindset jives with the way that the world works and that culture works. And, sometimes it just builds up to where, like, my reality just doesn't feel real. It's like, what is going on? And so then when I'm like trying to get my ducks in a row and get things all together, and then it just shatters, I'm like, okay, this is an insane existence. And but then I also have the depression that I can't pin on anything. So that's why I say, yeah, it's probably just how I'm wired. It goes hand in hand though for me with anxiety. So some people have just one or the other, and I have both. And it's usually the anxiety piece that precedes the depression. So when I'm realizing, that sense of futility, and I can't get anywhere, and I'm making no progress in this world, comes from feeling like I can't do certain things, right? Because like everything causes me stress and is exhausting. Again, just probably because of my personality and how I view things. But then when that builds up and then inevitably comes crashing down, that's when the depression comes in. And it feels logical to me. So that's the distinction I'm drawing. So I think some people view depression as completely illogical. I see it as kind of logical, but it's like, if I was to explain why, almost like in defense of depression as a functional mechanism, it does, it lights a fire that kind of forces you to fix what's wrong. I mean, you can't fix everything that's wrong, but it's like, when you sense that something isn't working, and that like this state of being can't function how it is, then it's like your brain is telling you, like, you want to keep playing the game, you're gonna have to throw out the old identity and start a new one. And I guess that's why I've gone through so many personal pivots in my life, maybe.
I'm I'm gonna ask a question here, and I'm sorry if I cross a line, so do tell me if I do. It's not intentional,
No,
but
go for it.
were you happy growing up as a child?
I had, okay, no, that's a very good question. So I was always anxious, felt like I was about to throw up just from like the things that were going on in the back of my head, right? Because it was like I was thinking about heaven and hell and
Mm.
eternity and these things that completely disgusted me at the same time as I was living a very idyllic, happy looking life.
Mm.
So I mean, I would take part and kind of even spearhead like activities with all the kids that I knew, and like it would just be like we're outside several hours a day having fun playing games, and at the same time I was miserable. But I was like,
Mm.
what else
Wow.
am I like? What else is there to do but to try? You
Yeah.
know? And I'm still in that position where I'm like, man, why not like make the most of every interaction and like be that guy? And people take me for like the life of the party, and yet, you know, I'm gonna keep doing that even if I'm feeling horrible, which I
Mm.
am most of the time. Even you know with a more balanced worldview, it's still like that's still how it is. I don't have my life figured out. So I think there was times when I was like, why wasn't I just open and honest about the fact that I hate everything? But I'm glad that I persisted through it. You know, because I've known people who just sort of shut down. You know, when they're depressed, you can't blame them. But I think learning how to uh, at least put on a happy face through it. You know, you can't always do that. That's a little hard on yourself, but like it's good to know how. And so I
Yeah.
developed that from an early age because I was discouraged to show depression. You know, that was that was actually something I would get called out for. They'd be like, "Matt, why are you acting depressed?" Well, because I am, but I but I couldn't say that.
By your family.
Yeah.
Was it like because of a religious reason, or was it just?
You might say that because yeah, that is a big theme in the type of church that I was in is like kind of a resistance to mainstream psychology. So like to the idea of depression, um, they would treat that as a quote unquote spiritual problem, right? Where it's like, yeah,
Mm.
there are doctors you could go to for that if you have like a real disease in your brain or something, but it was like most of the time this is a problem you deal with, you know, with your family or your pastor or you erase whatever sin in your life is causing this. And I didn't believe any of that, but and I think that a lot of those churches and the people that I knew have moved past that in their defense. But yeah, the like it, I think it was just seen as like if you're gonna show a certain emotion, um, you should show happy emotions, you know. And it was like it was just frowned upon, no pun intended, that you would carry yourself in a way that's not, uh, you know, exuberant.
I mean, I do understand what they're trying to say. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, it's being content with what you have, and for that
Yeah, sure.
reason, you must be happy. And being depressed or sad just means you're not happy with what or satisfied with what has been presented to you, I guess. I mean, I have nothing
Right.
against religion. I mean, I'm a Muslim myself.
Okay.
Um, it's just sometimes the extremes they lead to, they sometimes fire back, if I may say. I mean, I'm
Right.
not sure in your
Right.
case, like, I noticed that you have tattoos. Is that also against, like, your religion? Or,
It
like
would
your
have
beliefs,
been.
sorry. You were saying
Yeah, yeah.
tattoos.
It would have been you know a few decades ago, but that like I think modern Christianity and maybe also modern Islam, they sort of like they get a little bit more lenient on the
Yeah.
rules as things go along, and they realize like nobody's going to follow that forever, so they sort of move the lines a bit. Like, yeah, you can still be one of us and have that or do that, and that's probably a good thing to a certain extent. But yeah, I started getting those when I was you know caught between whether or not I fully believed it. Um, and funny enough, a lot of the tattoos are sort of religious in nature, but no regrets there.
Yeah, but you use it as a sort
Yeah,
of like self-expression, right? Because
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you wanted to rebel
Self-expression,
in a sense.
maybe a little bit,
Yeah.
maybe not so much rebel as like I was so used to being perceived as a kid who can't make his own choices that to be able to like mark my body in a way that says I did this, I created this, is one good thing, and also just not being afraid of permanence, right? Because that was so tied into the fear throughout my life, the idea of everything having infinite stakes, and then taking this thing that's like, to most people it's like a big deal. You're going to put something on your body for life, and I'm like, I don't care. I've been thinking in terms of eternity this whole time. Like, why don't I just do it? And I was a little bit afraid, like, what if it doesn't come out right? What if it's not exactly how I wanted? And then I got tattoos that didn't turn out exactly how I wanted, and I was like, it's okay. It's life will go on, and I don't have control over what my body looks like anyway, aside from working out. So just treat it as what it is. Play along with the game, you know.
So you've grown in a religious family. Then you've throughout that time you've had some depression or had some feelings that you weren't allowed to express, and then you started maybe you started going through ups and downs through some mental health issues, and you've had your ups and downs, you've had your highs and lows. So how did you cope with those challenges, if I may say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think from having it from such an early age, I gained sort of an ability that it took a long time, and this isn't a fix, but like having being able to look at the process of depression growing or anxiety becoming like a panic attack or something. You learn to identify the cycle physiologically. You begin to recognize that this is some kind of dance of chemicals in your brain that follows a certain pattern, and uh, in that way you're able to look at the subject of it maybe as not being so extreme as you thought. So for example, if I'm like going into developing anxiety over a relationship that I think is falling apart or something like that, and then it falls apart, and then it becomes depression, and then I'm like, borderline, I can't take this anymore. I can sort of separate the fact that some of these feelings have always happened over dumb things, regardless of the circumstance. So when I start thinking this is all because of that girl, this is because of this heartbreak, and obviously the only way to fix it is to get her back, then I can look at, internally and see how much of that is actually just my brain doing its thing, and then separate it out logically. Like, maybe this feeling isn't actually about that. This is just something that I go through, and letting it run its course will be more effective than going back and trying to fix everything. Because that turns into a spiral really fast. If I'm panicking about something, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's like a financial situation, or just something I'm going on in my life. Like, if I try to fix it as soon as I start freaking out, not gonna go
Yeah,
well,
it's not, it doesn't.
and then it's just gonna lead to more and more depression and more self-loathing, and yeah, you know how that goes.
Yeah, I mean, what you said is really similar to what I've experienced when it came to eating disorders. It was just
Really?
a vicious cycle of uh, binging and restricting over and over again. And I actually have a complete episode about this. It's but yeah, the first thing that I did when it came to solving this issue was, and it's something that you've mentioned earlier, which is accepting, or at least being honest with yourself that there is an issue there. There's something that you need to fix, because usually it's hard to, um, it's difficult to tell yourself that you have a weakness. It's not something that you want to hear, because it's depressing. It makes you feel weak. It makes you feel vulnerable, maybe helpless sometimes. But being honest with yourself and telling yourself that, listen, there is an issue, and it needs to be fixed. And then going through that, I guess, that journey of healing and recovering is difficult and exhausting, as you said. But once you've overcame that issue, that's where things light up, I guess. And it feels a lot better, and you feel a lot better, and your day changes, and the way you perceive things change. It's amazing what the mind does and how weak the mind is at the same time, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's the power of the mind to make you see things in a certain way when you want to see them in that specific way. So your eyes could deceive you based on what your brain wants to see. It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's
And it can be very, it can be complicated too, because sometimes there's a mix of things that are true and are not true going
mm,
on in your brain. And so you don't want to throw it out and say, no, this is all a problem. I need to completely change the way I think, because you know that there's something in there that's valid.
yeah.
And the challenge is like to separate it out, but you realize like it's all tangled up. And so yeah, you do need to step back and reanalyze and get rid of the bad habits. But and I think that's really common, in any kind of uh, mental health malady that comes from um, your perception of the world. And I've kind of looked at conspiracy theorists in this way, where I think a lot of times they latch onto something that they kind of know isn't true, but because they have a very valid sense of skepticism about what they have been told is true, and so that all gets mixed together in this really ugly way that produces something totally corrupted. Um, and the same could happen with a self-image thing, or you know some kind of group hatred, or just like anything like that, right? It's the different ideas get tangled together and they mix with your natural tendencies, and it takes a lot of work, to run inventory on your own
So,
life and brain.
what's your favorite conspiracy theory?
My favorite that I would like back it up, or my favorite freak show to watch.
Let's say one that you're really interested in, and you might think that it's actually true.
Hmm.
Or maybe what's the one that surprised you the most?
I'm surprised how many people think that the moon landing wasn't real.
The what,
Right? Like
sorry?
obviously we all know about that, but like so much of the population goes for that.
The moon
Like
landing.
they yeah, yeah, and I mean I can see how it could be staged, but like and I do think it probably happened, but so many people they actually just kind of grow up thinking, no, that was a hoax. We all know that was a hoax.
What do you think?
So I think it happened. I think it's bizarre that it happened. I can't believe that people in the 1960s figured out how to get to the moon. But I still think it's more likely that they figured it out than that they pulled off the hoax.
Yeah, and it was, I believe there was a race between the Soviet Union, if there was a
Yeah,
Soviet
yeah.
Union at that time, I can't really remember,
Space race.
and it's Russia and the US, right? They were racing
Right,
towards
right.
the
And
moon.
they got their guy into space first, but we got to the moon first.
Yeah, is that what it is? Because I thought there was always this discussion of who got there first, and everyone's gonna back up one team here. I've
Yeah, yeah.
but I remember when I watched the explanation as to why the moon landing is fake. Um, there were some pretty interesting points. One of them being that the flag was moving when they stuck it to the ground, as if there is
Really
air.
good.
So they said that there's no such. I mean, there's no air. There's no air in space. So how could that
It
happen?
could still move though. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I feel
Yeah.
like in the immediate moment that it's just been pushed into the ground, it could still move without Air. I mean, this. I'm gonna sound stupid if I go into anything remotely scientific.
No, actually, my friend debunked this. I don't know how accurate his explanation is, but he said that maybe it's the pressure from the cabinet, because as soon as they open it and they've stuck the flag, there's still some oxygen that has been released from the cabinet onto space. I'm not sure what happens there at that specific time when air gets mixed with space, but he
Yeah,
said that
yeah.
might have been the reason. Anyway, I don't know. I've watched a couple of, or actually I've listened to a couple of episodes on Spotify about conspiracy theories. One being Princess Diana and the reason why she was killed. Some people believe she was murdered, and it was all planned. I've also watched or listened to one about Area 51 and how it might contain some information about um, extraterrestrial. Can't even say it.
Extraterrestrial life.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point. And I think honestly, like when it comes to aliens, that's not even a conspiracy theory necessarily, because like anything to do with I think the idea that aliens were involved in the pyramids is a pretty valid argument.
Yeah, I don't know about that one.
No?
No,
Okay.
no, I'm
Okay.
not sure about that one. I haven't, maybe I haven't got there yet, but there are a lot of people who are talking about, and actually, I was talking about this to a friend, and we were wondering what kind of technologies they had to build such a huge monument or such a huge, I guess, building um,
Yeah.
back at that time.
And
But there
some of
is,
the
sorry, yeah, continue.
some of the mathematical geometric principles they factored in not just to construct it, but that were based on the dimensions of the Earth and the solar system.
Yeah,
That's what that's what makes me think like, oh yeah, there's if nothing else, a far more advanced civilization behind that. It doesn't have to be non-human, but at least that they as a civilization were way more advanced than we would give them credit for.
yeah, because there are some incidents of earthquakes and floodings and natural disasters that happened in the past that they say might have caused us to lose X amount of years worth of information that we had to spend maybe the same amount of time rebuilding it and reconstructing it. Some of this information might have been lost because there was no writing at that time, or maybe there were writings but not well preserved, so they got washed away maybe or damaged or burned.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but that's a
makes
whole
sense.
that's a whole other conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think it's pretty valid. That's not even a
Yeah.
conspiracy theory, right? Because we know, like, no matter how old the Earth is or whatever, like, how far it took for at least our culture to get where it is. So why would we think that hasn't gone through multiple cycles before?
And maybe now one last thing, because I know that you probably have, you have work that you need to go to soon. But um, do you have kids or a wife or
No,
a
no, no
girlfriend?
family at all,
No
man.
family, not
It's
yet.
just me. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, in the event where you do get kids, if you want to, would you raise them the same way your parents did?
No, not the same way. Definitely not the same way. I don't think my parents would even raise a new set of kids the same way because, like, they've learned a few things. But no, I mean, could I possibly ever homeschool my kids? Maybe. Could I even maybe take them to church? Possibly under certain circumstances. But the overall doctrine behind it, the way of viewing life as an exercise in staying away from bad things and making sure you believe exactly the right things is something I would never want to put a child of my own in, especially if it's my biological child, because I know that she would have exactly a lot of the same tendency toward anxiety and depression as I do. And I would not wish that on anyone. So, if anything has deterred me from having children, it's that fear. But, I would like to see if I could create an environment for a child like myself that is both respectful of how crazy and insane life is, and the mystery behind it, while at the same time not becoming overtly religious in the negative sense.
Yeah.
But I would want my child to be able to explore those topics, and for me to have some dialogue with them about it, because I think that if I had not been raised in church and in something of a bubble, I still would have had a lot of the same questions.
Yeah.
So I'd be really curious how a child of mine would approach those things, and who knows, maybe they would end up becoming religious or following a faith even without me pushing them into it. That would be really interesting.
And then maybe they'll go on a podcast and talk about it as well.
Yeah, and maybe they'll just rip on me the whole time.
So last few things. So I usually do this with guests when I interview them the first time, is just simple answering a question. How would you describe yourself in one word?
Enigmatic.
What is the thing you like the most about yourself?
That I can adapt to almost any environment.
What is the thing that you hate about yourself that you want to change?
That I suck at learning any new thing.
And if someone came up to you and told you that you have one advice and one advice only to give to the listeners, what would that advice be?
I got to go back to the don't try to fix every problem immediately. Work slowly on what you can do to improve yourself, and don't try to change anyone else.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, man. Good talk.
And as usual, guys, if you wanna, let me just try this new thing. So I'm gonna transition to a new screen here. Yeah. And okay, let's maximize this, and I'll share the screen with you so you can see it as well. Screens, boom, go live. Yeah. So again, if you guys wanna check Matthew's book, it's called. Can you see it? Can you see my screen?
Can I see your screen? I can see it.
Yeah, okay. It's Swept Up Lessons from the End Times. Again, I'll post this to the description. Also, I'll make sure to add their YouTube, Instagram. You can check it out. And please don't forget to follow us on our socials. That's all for now. Have a good night.